One of my favorite things to ask graffiti artists and graffiti writers when I meet them, if they so choose to tell me what they tag, is, oh, how did you get your tag name? It's one of my favorite things to ask them because 50% of the time there's a really good story to go with how a graffiti writer got their tag, and I mean the other 50%, there's not really any good story to go with it. And I think that's because of the differences in how graffiti writers choose their names. And today I'd like to go over the three main ways that I have personally seen graffiti writers choose names, and how I believe probably most graffiti artists and writers choose a tag to write. And while we're at it, I'd love to know how each and every one of you got your graffiti tag, maybe in a comment. I love reading all the unique stories and hearing them from different writers, so would love to hear that. If you leave a comment about that, I'll definitely read it, give you some love for that, and all that jazz. So I'm gonna go over, as I said, the three main ways I see writers commonly choose a graffiti name, as well as how I chose my graffiti tag. And hopefully this will help some of the newer writers who are sort of looking for a name learn a couple ways that they can choose a name, and hopefully it'll start a good conversation between some of the intermediate writers and newer writers about how they chose their names, the longer term writers that is. And later in the video too, actually, I do want to talk about the shirt that I'm wearing. More information on that later, but let's get to it. So the first way I see people choosing a graffiti name is the one that really results in pretty much no good story to go with it at all, and that's pretty much also the way that I ended up choosing my graffiti tag long ago. So I'll tell you what this way is, and then I'll also tell you how I came to write Sciz and Sciz, and sort of the progression that there was up to when I started writing those names. And that first way is basically writers just choosing letters that they like. So often when I'll ask a writer, oh, how'd you get that name? Then this is when they say, I just sort of chose letters I liked how this went. And they get into these explanations about things. They'll say, I liked how this flowed, I liked how these looked together. And that's the reason I believe this method is actually very underrated for choosing a name. You do have the freedom with this method to actually choose sequences of letters in a sequence that naturally works well together, so that you can have a bit more of an easy time making letters flow in a piece, a throw up, or even a tag. Some letter combinations help you manage negative space easier and things like that. Not that you can't do that with any letter combination, but some combinations of letters simply make that more natural and easy, which is a big plus, especially if you're a newer writer. And I'll give you an example of that here. Let me just pull up my Photoshop. So I have this piece pulled up on screen here. Let me just enlarge that for you. And this is a Sciz piece that I made. It might be on my Instagram already. It's not actually finished in this picture, and I haven't actually finished it yet, so maybe it won't be on my Instagram when this video goes out. But I wanted to explain a little bit how the name I use sort of promotes a little bit of an easier structure to work with in pieces specifically. So what I mean by that is here, if you just let me grab a paintbrush. So with the letters S, C, I, and Z, number one, S and Z are perfect, because you can see here, that's the S and the Z. Basically, an S and a Z are mirrors of each other, and when you have something on each end that is sort of symmetrical, it promotes exactly that. It promotes symmetry. So you can see here, I've made these elements both sort of the bottom part of the Z and the bottom part of the S. This is horrible drawing. I'm drawing with a trackpad here. So they both promote flow towards the middle of the piece. I made these elements in here of negative space the same. And basically, because I have an S and a Z, I'm able to sort of flip them and have an easier time making pieces symmetrical. Something else nice usually about an S beside a C is that the bottom part of an S that is curved like this, it usually flows very nicely with the parts of C's that are curved like this, and that's exactly what sort of happened here. Of course, I tried to do that a little bit, but you have this continuing on over even into here and curving down there. And of course, with the I made a little, I feel like the letter I is sort of, because it has the sticks, it's a little bit more dynamic, and you can have an easier time doing that sort of thing as well. And you know what? I'll also show you a tag that was in my previous video. It's a chrome comparison. It compares a bunch of chrome formulae on the market. You can check that out in the corner where the cards are. But one of the tags that someone asked me to tag up was left in that video, and I just think it's such a good tag that I wanted to point out exactly how this tag makes it a little bit easier to promote flow within a tag even or a piece. So you can see here, left, the L there. We're going to count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We have 7 horizontal lines there that all naturally go the same way without really making any effort to do so. So that's a very easy tag to do that with. Similarly, and I'll move on in a sec, don't worry, you have these horizontal lines, the LE, the F, and the T, all those, or vertical lines, sorry, all those vertical lines make it very easy to just have a naturally spaced tag or piece or throw up. And I thought left was a great name to tag because of that. And obviously you can make any group of letters look good together. Don't think I'm saying anything to the contrary of that, but what I am saying is that some combinations of letters make that a little easier to do with a bit less effort. So maybe some combinations of letters that you think sound cool together might be worth working with a little bit to see if you like them as your tag name. But the tag left, as we just saw, is actually a good example of the second way people choose a graffiti name in some cases. And that way is choosing a real word, but one that already has a sequence of letters that works well together. I'm not sure if that's how Left here in particular chose his name or her name, but that is how some people choose their name. And basically that can result in having an awesome tag like Left. And that's actually sort of how I got my first name that I wrote, which I'm sure almost none of you, if any of you at all, know the first name that I wrote, and that name was actually Spaz. The first name I wrote was Spaz. At the time when I was like 10, I thought that sounded cool, and I thought the letters in it looked cool, and although I didn't really understand at that time artistic concepts and things like that, I now understand probably why I thought those letters looked cool together. So let me just go into Photoshop again here for a second to show you why the name Spaz probably looked good to me. This is why I think it would be a good name to write now if anyone wants to use that as a tag. The reason I probably thought that these letters looked really nice together was simply because of some of the same stuff we saw before. The S here you can see, same thing, very symmetrical with the Z, just like Sciz and Sciz. But something else nice about Spaz is that there is in this area, you know, the nice bit of negative space that happens to sort of match up in size with the negative space in an A. And also these 3 sort of sticks at the bottom, the 2 of the A and the 1 of the P, are a nice easy way to make a piece nice and vertical if you're trying to do something like that. And this part of the A can be shoved over in here. That's the worst arrow ever. And it'll sort of handle this bit of negative space. It's easy to work with is my point. So that's probably why I liked that when I was a kid. And after I wrote Spaz, and don't worry, I'll get to the third way people choose their name in a second, but just for anyone who was wondering, after I wrote Spaz, I thought schism sounded cool, but I spelt it S-C-I-Z-M without the H. Nowadays, I would leave the H in if that's what I was writing. That's sort of a nice letter to work with sometimes. But I wrote schism, and then I shortened it to Sciz, and nowadays I switch between Sciz and Sciz every other sketch, because an E is a nice letter to work with, an I, sometimes. So for anyone who was wondering, that's how I got my name. Like I said, no cool story whatsoever. But the third way that I hear a lot of writers get their graffiti tag or their name is almost to be given it by a graffiti mentor or by a friend or something like that. And that's a very situational way to get a name, so that's why so many good stories tend to come with those names, and why I love to ask that question to writers I meet. And what I mean by given a name by someone like that is sort of, usually the story goes something like, oh, me and my friends were screwing around and this happened and someone called me this or something and the name stuck. Essentially, I'm describing a glorified version of a nickname, basically. But that really is how a lot of people get their names. And it's very nice to have like a word that you do think represents you well. And this method usually does sort of result in that. And a bonus sort of way that I am shoving in with this third way, I don't really want to make it a fourth because it's sort of the same thing, is identifying with like a word that you like or something like that. And that's nice to do because a lot of words are just nice to identify with. There's things that you positively associate with or would want to be like. For example, I don't know how any of these writers got their names, but Sirius, I really love that name. That's an awesome name to write. Another one is Looter. That's a really cool name. Giant. I love Giant because, you know, his name is like, he writes these giant throw-ups and the G is just so sizable in them, and I don't know, that's just my opinion. One of my very favorites is Rhyme, MSK obviously. It's like a crossover between graffiti, but it's also identifies with at least two of the other elements of hip-hop, which is really cool. I don't know, I just like the name Rhyme. But that brings me to one of my most important points of this video, and that is just names that you can't write. Generally, the only names that are like in consensus to be off limits are names of writers who are really, really big already and super well known and famous. So obviously like J.A., don't write that. Even more like people who are just famous for pieces and stuff, like maybe Burst, G-Back. Probably wouldn't want to write that. And then lastly, names you wouldn't want to write would also include names of writers who are prominent and have passed away. But like I said earlier, I'd love to hear how any of you guys got your graffiti names, whether there's a cool story to go with it or not. If there isn't, hey, it'll just make me feel better about how lame the way I got my name was. I have more top 3 and top 5 videos in a playlist if you do want to check them out. It's one of the most popular series here on the channel, so we keep making more of the videos, and as long as you guys keep loving them, I'll keep making them, so let me know if you do. But wait, the first link in the description is a link to an unlisted video that you might want to check out. It explains a bit more about this shirt. I'll give you some context in that video if you do want to click that link. It's an unlisted video, so it's the only way to get to that video is through the link in the description. So if you really want to be a part of like the exclusive few to see that video and know about how you can get some graffiti shirts for yourself, check that link in the description. I hope to see you in another top 5 video or something like that very soon. Check them out. Until my next one. Peace.